Welcome back to No Disintegrations. Dave and I break down our thoughts on what's going on from the prequels, the original trilogy, and the Disney Lucasfilm sequels, as well as Star Wars television series. If you want a different take on the science fiction genre, particularly Star Wars, we would be honored if you would join us. And remember, he's no good to me dead. Welcome back to No Disintegrations. You got Rob and Dave here. We are going to be talking about Ashoka Episode 2. I know a lot of you guys have already checked it out, so we are probably going to be speaking to the choir a little bit. But as always, I think it's always interesting to think about it. You go back and you relook at the first part of it is the title, Toil and Trouble, which is a direct lift from Macbeth. And that is an indication of witches. And this is like, you know, bubble, toil and trouble is one of the things that we've heard many, many times. You saw the imagery in the first episode of the witches, basically handling the eye, which was like the orb that Ahsoka ended up taking out of the tomb, which ended up having to be the map. And so I think it's kind of cool that they named it that because it makes a reference back to the previous episode in that respect, but it also hints at the big reveal of Morgan Elsbeth being a Night Sister, which, you know, there's a lot of speculation on the interwebs about that last season, just because they're like her skin tone and some of her tattoos and everything else. But it was confirmed.
They're complaining that she's human. I'm like, well, what do you think the sisters were, dude? I mean,
yeah. Well, again, you also have to look at the Night Sisters that we encountered in the not Rogue Wars, but in Clone Wars, were dark side users for a very, very long time. And so what do we know about people that use dark side for a long time? Their body gets corrupted over time. So, you know, Morgan Elsbeth, maybe she's just evil. You know, maybe she's not a practicing dark force user, and that's why her body has not been corrupted and destroyed. You understand what I'm saying? So for example, if you look at Plagueis, if you look at Darth Bane, even Palpatine to a point, like they wear their Sithness through the destruction of their body over time. And so I think it's reasonable for somebody to be a humanoid that's a dark side user, particularly if she's not like fully engulfed in the dark side. And I think, to be honest, that Thrawn wouldn't have a person that was a pure dark side user around him, or a force user in general. Like, if you've read the Thrawn books, like, yeah, the only force users that they really had around them were the navigators, you know, and that's a whole other story, which is interesting because I know that they wrote that in the novels to kind of give a tie back to the original canon, and the Skywalkers were the force adept people that the Chiss used to navigate through hyperspace. And so there's a reference there, but I legitimately think, you know, starting the show, cool to get that little intro, cool to see the little monument out there, the little Sith palace, or the whatever we're going to call that thing. I guess it would be a seeing stone.
Alchemy.
Yeah, but to see, you know, Morgan Elsbeth come out, use her magic, you see the green flames, which is also, you know, the illusion of what we saw tied to Clone Wars. I mean, you saw the red flame, or not the red flame, but the green flame or the green smoke anytime the Night Sisters use their magic, which was very, very good. And so again, you know, for argument's sake, like, I get it. Some people are going to complain because she's humanoid, but the other part of it is again, you know, there's two things. One, there's a budget. So you don't want to have this person prosthetic up every time that you want to use them, because it reduces the amount of time that you can use them on screen, particularly if they have a limited availability. But the other part of it is I am more inclined to believe that her lack of scarring or mutilation is due to the fact that she is not an active dark magic or dark force user. But I'll pause there, Dave. What are your thoughts?
I don't know about that so much. I mean, if you look at even through the Clone Wars, and you look at the witches of Dathomir all the way up until Grievous showed up and wiped them out, you know, they were definitely human type people The only one that I'm aware of that had survived that was a member of that clan was Asajj Ventress. And she was just as human looking as anybody else. The only ones that weren't on Dathomir were the likes of Savage and Darth Maul. So everybody is scratching their head, and they look at the sisters, and they're thinking, "Oh yeah, but this girl Morgan, she's human." Well, so what?
Yeah, but it doesn't mean
the majority of the sisters were human. Every witch you ever heard of was human. Or seen in your imagination was human. So it's not, you're talking about not necessarily everybody being a Force user, but they were certainly into black magic.
Correct.
No doubt about it.
And I think there's a difference between Zabraks and humanoids. I mean, like, Zabraks have horns. Darth Maul had horns. Savage Opress had horns. Like, if you look at the other Zabraks that have appeared in other, Star Wars media, they have horns. It doesn't mean that they're not humanoid, because they're very much humanoid. But maybe the female version of the Zabrak doesn't have horns. I'm not going to dive that deep into Star Wars lore, but you understand what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of different explanations for Morgan Elspeth's look as, a witch.
I'm not overly concerned about her presentation at all. In fact, I kind of like the way she's in it. The greatest part about the Witches of Dathomir being put on this stage, because most people that wouldn't know now have the chance to see it. And even when you're watching Clone Wars, what's the first thing you think of when you see them for the first time? And you're like, oh, wow. And this ties back to another fetish, as it completes the cycle of Black Sabbaths as war pigs, where the witches in their black masses. Yeah. That's exactly who they are in the entire chain of the story. Mm-hmm. And they got wiped out, now they still exist. And the evidence of their culture remains over the galaxies in ruin, yet still there. I think it's a very interesting component. I'm glad they brought it up. And it's like the only real evil that they could face, especially if you have a crazy witch trying to usurp the authority of the galaxy by bringing in another commander such as Thrawn.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about that, and I think a lot of people are for me, I'm patiently waiting for something else to happen, because you mentioned it before. Asajj Ventress is still alive. Where is she in the galaxy? Is she part of this? Is she, is she still hidden? Is she dead? We don't know, because again, her fate was largely different based off of, the original animated Clone Wars that was done by Jenny Trudetsky on Cartoon Network. She ended up getting killed by Anakin, but that was retconned with the new story from the Clone Wars. So where is Asajj Ventress? We know that she's out there. We know that she had a relationship with Quinlan Voss at some point, but where are those two now? We know they escaped Order 66, but what ended up happening to them? Because they technically weren't Jedi at the time. And so there's a lot to be said, and again, like, for sake of argument, we were talking about this last week, but it's like, well, how many people actually did escape, Order 66? One could make an argument that Ahsoka escaped Order 66 because she technically wasn't a Jedi. She was a Force user, but she wasn't a Jedi. So, like, she wasn't part of the Order. She just happened to be in a mission supporting the Order. And I know that's semantics in a gray area, but the reality of it is she was not a Jedi that survived Order 66.
You got a lot of clones that she served with when she was a little spud, and they all turned on her.
Yeah.
Without patting an eye, man.
Yeah. Well, that's
good soldiers follow orders.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But I mean, even Crosshair is starting to realize that, that was misguided. Because look at
out of all of them, when you're talking about all the clones, the one I think about the most is Jesse.
Yeah.
Dude, not only did Jesse flip, man, he had what was left of the 501st out there in the bay waiting.
Yeah.
Hey, look, you're going to go along or we're going to put you down. It wasn't no gray area.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of it, is like, there's a lot of ties and underpinnings of the Clone Wars that are very, very important, that if you're a casual Star Wars fan and you haven't watched Rebels or the Clone Wars, you've missed out on a lot of backstory So there's a lot of exposition, and that's one thing that I will say about the Ahsoka series is they're making the assumption that you've watched Clone Wars and Rebels, or at least know who Ahsoka is and kind of her story arc between those two TV shows, because they're starting at a point where there isn't much of a backstory. Like, hey, Anakin was my master, I left. Like, that's basically it, and I'm okay with that because, again, it forces you to check out other properties, which I'm okay with. But, where we're going is, again, like the concern that I had in episode 1 about this being, the Force is female leading the show was hammered out in fruition in episode 2, right? So you have Sabine, Hera, and Ahsoka are basically like the 3 main stories.
And Morgan.
Yeah, and Morgan, right? So now you have four females. And then, at some point, and I hate to say it, and I'm going to say it now, the reason why Ray Stevenson's character is probably not going to be in season 2 because he's going to get killed by his apprentice, because that's how the Sith work, like straight up. We know that. And so is it going to be her killing him and joining with Morgan Elspeth as, her apprentice-ish, or is it going to be some other fashion? And like, that's one of my concerns, honestly, with how things are going right now. And, and you and I talked about it before we got on this call, but how people forget how to tell stories. Storytelling is one of the most important parts. And like, that was the thing that everybody was banking on with Dave Filoni is, okay, Dave is going to tell us a good story. And the reason why he's going to tell us a good story is because, I think with no reservation, most Ahsoka fans can say her first introduction to us, she was kind of annoying and she sucked. Like, the Clone Wars animated film was not that great. Like, hey, we're going to kidnap Jabba's kid and then deliver him back to the palace. That seems like a throwaway story from Legends. It's like a short story that somebody wrote that's like, it's like fan fiction, right? And I think even when the character was introduced, it just didn't make any sense. Like, how is, Anakin Skywalker having a Padawan? Is he not really an official Jedi master, but he's on the Jedi Council? It kind of falls into all those kind of silly things that happened in the prequels that people just didn't like. Why is Anakin on the council, but he's not a master? Well, let's give him a Padawan instead. Well, how is he a Padawan when he's working with Obi-Wan Kenobi? Are they like co-generals now in the 501st? Are they partners in all of this? You know what I mean? So it made the story, if you really pick it apart, a little bit wonky, right? Because
I don't think you really understand the roles of either one of them very well watching it just strictly on film.
Yeah, because
I don't think people really, even a casual viewer, would not grasp the idea that Anakin Skywalker was a 17-year-old, one of the greatest frickin' that ever been assembled.
Yeah. Yeah.
The significance of that.
Yeah. Well, that and the, hey, look, like you and I both served. Like, we don't put the freaking 18-year-old lieutenant in charge of anything. Like, we give him a platoon sergeant that's a little bit smarter than he is and say, hey, boss, like, I get it. Like, on paper, you're in charge of this thing.
But that says a lot about Anakin, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there was no greater pilot in the galaxy, and he was an extremely gifted individual.
Yeah. But
running around with clones, man. Handling business, dude.
However, Anakin was incredibly tactical. He was not a strategic thinker, right? Because if he was a strategic thinker, well, let's be honest. Like, if you really want to get into criticisms, the entire Jedi Order was not strategic, because they were thinking about the here and now. The only person that kind of looked to the future was Yoda, but everybody else was too busy fighting. Everybody else was too busy fighting the fight to realize that Palpatine was moving chess pieces around the board the whole time. And that's another great episode that comes up in the Clone Wars is when, Ezra snags up Rex and the other survivors, and then they go and they fight the droids, and they're like, hey, why are we doing this? Because essentially this is the last battle of the Clone Wars because y'all both lost. So let's just settle it here, and that was one of those really good episodes of Rebels that I enjoyed watching because it was a callback to all this other stuff. And that's what you're starting to see in Ahsoka. There's a lot of fan service, like, hey, like, credit to them for that. I think the whole thing with, Sabine being wounded and being in the hospital, is cool. But the whole like, oh, there were 2 droids, that was kind of, it's just convenience. It was a plot convenience. Like, oh, Ahsoka's going to go back and find the other droid, and then we're going to be able to hack it. Like, look, nobody leaves a stay behind ambush like that unless there's a purpose to it. Morgan,
especially a Jedi Padawan,
right? It like, again, being picky, but it doesn't make any sense. Why would I?
They got to move the story forward too.
Correct.
I think that's a big part of it. It had nothing to do with pragmatism.
Yeah, but the other part of it is like, why didn't Sabine have some kind of alternate backup? Like, Sabine has been a rebel for how many years? She understands that, like, you're going to get attacked if you have the right information. So backing up, that, like, what was the entire story vehicle of A New Hope and The Force Awakens? Like, I have this freaking data tape with a map on it. Yeah. That everybody's trying to get access to. So why would you lose the map in the first, you know what I mean? Like, why would you use the map as soon as you got it? So again, it was just I think it was just a convenience in the story that I'm not a fan of. Like, I do like the fact
it's a depiction of Sabine in a way that's likened to, a teenager. Yeah. That whose word doesn't mean crap, and they don't want to do what they're told because they think they're special. Well, there's a huge undertone of that throughout the first two episodes between Sabine and Ahsoka, and it kind of leaves Ahsoka, as we talked about, coming across wooden. We're not seeing the coy, humorful snips. Yeah. Right. If you get anything out of like you mentioned earlier, the Clone Wars film, a lot of people didn't like snips. I didn't have that issue. I dug her. Yeah. It took me a minute, but it came. And it came probably after Anakin told her that she'd never make it as Obi-Wan's Padawan, but she might make it as his. Yeah. Oh, and I think, and boom, right there in that moment, you had Sky Guy and Snips were born. Yeah. And you're not getting any of that personality in this show. Instead, we've got teen drama.
Yeah, well, and the other piece of it is like, if you're looking at where Ahsoka has been, like, she needs friends. Like, she shouldn't be closed off emotionally to any of these people. Like, look at what she's gone through. She lost her master, and her best friend. Like, you could make the argument that on the tier of friendship, it was, Anakin and Obi-Wan were best buds. He was married to, Padme. And like, her circle of friends literally were Rex, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme.
That's it.
And so that's literally all
Padme she had. Is loosely, yeah.
Yeah. But by the virtue of that, she was around Anakin all the time, and she's done missions with Padme. So there was a tie there that she just doesn't have. And then you drop her into all these other planets, and every time she goes to the other planets, it's just like the 2 sisters that she came across in Coruscant, right? Right. That was a chance for her to have somewhat of a family. And then guess what? That immediately gets dashed and destroyed. And really, the Ghost crew, if you watched Rebels, was the closest thing that Ahsoka had to the Jedi Order since she was in the Jedi Order. And now everything is all broken up and gone in different directions. And so again, I'm hopeful that they'll fill in those gaps of like what caused the break, or was it because the Empire fell and she went to go find Ezra Bridger? Was that the reason why, the team broke up? I can understand why Hera left. Like, she's grieving. She lost, the man in her life, and she's trying to raise a son. So that makes sense for Hera to go off and do something else for a little bit, Right. But for Sabine, like, look, Sabine is colorful and brooding. I mean, that's basically it. She's got different color hair, and she's brooding in freaking Ezra's tower. I don't buy that, because the way that she was built and came across at the end of the show was there was a bond between Sabine and Ezra that now I'm willing to concede that may be a Force bond, right? So like we saw the Force bond, it wasn't worked out very well, I think, in my opinion, in The Last Jedi, in the whole, in the Disney sequel trilogy. But Force bonds are a thing. They're in Legends. They're in video games. So you being able to connect with another person and you leave a Force imprint on them, that's perfectly okay. I'm willing to accept that. But what I'm not willing to accept is that Sabine who is this adventurer, who is this Mandalorian adventurer, is just going to sit in one place and do nothing. That is completely against their culture. Like Mandalorians don't sit. When absent of a culvert, what are they out there doing? They're out there hunting. They're out there, establishing themselves in the world. They have to, and to be honest, Sabine has never redeemed herself with anyone other than her immediate family and Bo-Katan, right? So she could have easily been running with Bo. She could have easily been partners with Axe Wolves. She could have,
Instead, she's around moping.
Yeah.
And that's not the Mando way neither.
Yeah.
She got a lot, but Sabine's got a lot of backstory that's pretty good, especially when you look at the end of the Mandalorian arc that takes place towards the end of Rebels. And you see what her participation was in that, what happened with the Darksaber that they found on Dathomir. I don't know.
Yeah,
not a dramatic way. I think it's I'll probably get chased down the street with pitchforks over this, but it's a girl thing, dude.
Yeah, and maybe
who are they trying to relate to? Angry kids, and that's what I take from that, man. I mean, you got Sabine, who's an angry kid, doesn't want to participate. She didn't want to, here, don't leave my ship with this map. Yeah, oh, okay. And then her word don't mean shit. She runs the hell away. Doesn't understand why people gets mad at her.
Yeah.
So that kind of crap, we'll see. I don't know if that's like her cutting her hair as some symbol of her deciding to act like an adult and participate in adult shit now.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we'll see.
I think her cutting her hair off was symbolic of her like accepting, like, okay, like I'm in the fight, I got to be a Mandalorian again.
I hope so. I mean, because she was a badass little girl, man.
Yeah, but the other
ass around Mandalorian moons.
Well, that, and we've actually seen that trope before, unfortunately, and that's a callback. That's a callback to Katie Sackhoff in Battlestar Galactica, right? So if you remember season 3, Starbuck grows her hair out, and she's being a woman. And then when she jumps back into the cockpit, she cuts her hair off and becomes the Starbuck from season 1, or at least attempts to become that person again. So we've seen that trope visually play out in other media. So it makes sense for it to play out the way that it did. I think the coolest moment of the show, honestly, for me in episode 2 was the visit to the Imperial Destruction Yards. One, because I like the actor that played like the director of the Destruction Yard, which was cool. Forget his name, but I think it's I can't remember. But the guy's funny. He used to be on House. He's a good actor.
I know what you're talking about.
You know what I mean?
The doctor with the limp, the gimp.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, good actor. Great cameo for him. And then, of course, Ahsoka diving out the window and then fighting the Inquisitor. And so, again, the Inquisitor is, who knows, right?
And I'm glad you brought that up. That brings up a great point.
Every name that we know of the Inquisitor right now is Merick. Is it a version of Galen Merick? Is it a clone of Galen Merick? Because, again, Force Unleashed is not canon. So if you think about the Force Unleashed and the 2 stories that came out of Force Unleashed 1 and 2, it literally was Vader's Secret Apprentice and the clone of Vader's Secret Apprentice, like running around the galaxy doing stuff. And
we'll see. That's the number one question, isn't it? Who the hell's around? Every time I look at that, I see that Inquisitor show up, and he's an outstanding representation of one, better than anything that we saw in Kenobi.
Yeah, well,
no question about it. But you got to ask, man, there's an Inquisitor that's still around. Who the hell else is still around
after all those years? And knowing full well that Skywalker's still running around the galaxy. He's building a Jedi Academy. Grogu is out there somewhere. Did Keller and Beck survive? We don't know. He may have survived. You know what I mean? Like, there's a handful of people. Like I said, there's 30, 35 people-ish that survived.
Bo-Katan and that whole tribe.
Yeah.
And Mando, dude, they're all around.
Yeah,
and they're the last one of them. They could show up at any damn minute.
Yeah, the armor.
Armor.
Like, and any of those would be a great.
Han Solo, Princess Leia.
Would be but again, with all of those, how do we bring them into live action and make them impactful and not have them be a throwaway character? Because I think that's part of the problem. I think legitimately, like, Balin and his apprentice were designed to be throwaway characters. Like, hey, we're going to pull in this Jedi, and we're going to pull in this Jedi, and we're going to pull in this apprentice that are going to, they're going to play a part, but we don't know what part they're going to play. Is it going to be a throwaway part? Is it going to be a pivotal part? Rumor has it, if you look at the speculation online, they're going to become some part or all of the Knights of Ren, right?
Yeah.
But again, why would I give up a lightsaber to pick up an axe? Because the Knights of Ren are Force users-ish, but they don't have they don't have Jedi weapons, for lack of a better term. And so it's interesting to see where they're going to go with that, because I think when you look at the trailers, I think Balin is going to have a bigger part in the story than we all think.
Well, you want to peel him back too, know more about him.
Yeah. Well,
he's doing evil stuff, but he doesn't behave like an evil person.
No.
I'm really curious to see what more comes. There's no telling about his apprentice, though.
It's like straight up.
She's obviously, ambitious.
Yeah, but look at it this way: like he straight up adopted the Mandalorian code. Like, hey, man, I go where the money is.
Yeah.
For the right price, for the right price, you got a Jedi. It's the same thing as the Mandalorians for years. Like, hey, for the right price, you can have this Mandalorian dropship doing work for you. And so I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. The second episode, I liked it. It was, I think story-wise, it was a little bit better than the first one, because I think there was just too much exposition in episode 1, because they were trying to paint the picture of, hey, if you've never seen Ahsoka at all and you know nothing about her, we're going to try and throw these key markers of who these people are in front of you.
Here she is walking around a map, for 5 minutes.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And like, I think legitimately, like, they were reintroducing the character to a new audience, and I'm okay with that. In episode 2, did they advance the story? Yes. Did I like the way they advanced the story? I'll tell you tonight after I watch episode 3.
Yeah. Well, here now on that note, here's the rumor that there will be a Clone Wars flashback that includes Anakin, Rex, and Ahsoka.
Which would be great.
Man, let me tell you, that's, to me, for this series, that's like Boba riding the Rancor in the Book of Boba Fett to me. Yeah. To see those 3 in live action, just stomping through a droid factory or some shit.
Yeah, like that. That would be like a great moment. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And again, and the best part about it is that would be an awesome moment, but don't lose it for the sake of a bad story.
I think a lot of it is giving the fans what they want. And it might not have much to do with the story, but damn, I want to see it.
Yeah. And sadly, though, one of the things, and again, this is me being a Star Wars purist, is we didn't do a lot of flashbacks at all in Star Wars until they got to Disney. There were 0.
No, it's fucking facts, man. In fact, not even that. Move forward. It wasn't until they started doing series.
Correct. Well,
I even want to say that Boba is probably Boba's first one to do it.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about it, those were legitimate flashbacks. And you could say Rogue One was kind of a flashback because but unfortunately, for the sake of argument, I would say no. And the reason why I say no, we already know the outcome of the story is that they got the
Death Star plans.
Yeah, they got the Death Star plans, passed into the rebellion. Death Star was destroyed. So chronologically, there's just a time jump in Rogue One. So you get introduced to, Galen Orson Krennic. Then we have the time jump to young Jyn Orso on the prison bus. Then she gets broke out by Andor and K2SO. So when you think of it from that perspective, like Rogue One, although it was a flashback for Star Wars as a whole, it still was a continuous thread of
the storyline.
This is the starting point right here is Galen and, getting recruited back into the Empire. And the end point was, Scarif being destroyed and the plans making it into the hands and rolling into A New Hope.
And what started that entire story? One lady holding that disc up in front of a bunch of rebels talking about, man, the people that died to get us this information.
Yeah.
That scene, that sentence alone created that entire movie.
Yeah, and I think, and there's still, and that's the hope for Star Wars, right? Because there's so many small little nuanced things that you could just run with and embellish and build out. Look at it this way: like Thrawn was, cover art on a book in Legends, and look at the character that they built between the Clone Wars and today. Ahsoka came from the mind of Dave Filoni, but look at the depth and breadth of that character that she has. Again, so we can wrap this up. I always appear hopeful that they're going to be able to close out Ahsoka in the way that she needs to be. I would like to see a little bit more humor from her because, Rosario Dawson has the chops. Yeah, Rosario Dawson has the chops to pull it off. And, maybe
I don't think that's her problem, dude.
Yeah, but I think maybe like a reference to her nickname or something to that effect. Does she have any remnants of the Jedi Order? I doubt it.
But I mean, that's just not even that, man. I mean, the whole character was bubbly.
Yeah, well, her whole character was a great,
snide and quick, and you're seeing slow and wooden now.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that's like, hey, we're just trying to lead you into the next big thing, and that's the hope. Right. But I'm not seeing it yet. Not saying that it won't happen, but again, like if the previous Disney sequels are any example of what we've seen, then it's kind of like, oh,
we'll see. I'm optimistic.
Yeah,
I'm very optimistic.
All right. Well, this is No Disintegrations. We talked about Ahsoka episode 2. We kind of went round in circles. We touched a lot of different things. And again, this is just from our perspective. Dave and I are not going to be the hardcore guys that are going to watch it like 14 times and pick out every Easter egg and pick apart every little detail. That's just not
little codex.
Yeah. We don't, we're not trying to fill a Jedi holocron with information. We're just talking about what we saw and what we observed and how it makes us feel in relation to the previous content that's been put out. I think there's, again, I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I think even, all the Disney series, as people complained about them, there are things that like they absolutely need to work on, like Kenobi walking down a hall in an Imperial base with a kid underneath his jacket. So much so the young child actress was like bagging on it because she's like, this thing was just dumb. Like she said it was dumb. So if a 7-year-old kid can acknowledge that was bad, then we can all say that was bad.
I know, right?
But
Kenobi was terrible on so many levels.
But there's been things that have come out. Like if you have not checked out the story of Jedi Survivor and Jedi Outcast, like, dude, they could easily bring in Cal Kestis. And maybe that's where Ahsoka disappears to, right? Because Cal Kestis is out and about in the galaxy. He was running with Saw Gerrera for a very, very long time. And then after Saw, he disappears, And so there's some great stuff out there that's still kind of untapped. And like if they really wanted to set up, Ahsoka season 2 and the next EA video game about Star Wars, like plant the seed of Cal Kestis somewhere in there. Because Cal Kestis, he's kind of annoying in the first game, but like in the second game, it's like, yeah, I can respect the guy's technique. I like the dude as a character, and he's got a good team around him. He's got his droid now. He's got his Night Sister girlfriend, maybe, And so there's a lot of things that could be introduced, and like have him bump into Luke Skywalker and be like, no, man, I'm not coming to your new
Luke's
Jedi
out there.
Academy. I'm not coming to the new Jedi Academy because I've realized through my adventuring in the galaxy, just like all Mandalorians do, through my adventures and my trials, I've learned that this is not the life for me. I need to be able to do X, Y, or Z. And that's one of the things that you're starting to see in all of the new stuff that's coming out. Is, we're starting to see that, maybe both the Sith and the Jedi were wrong in how they dealt with things, because I can tell you the most ferocious fighters in the world fight for their families. They don't fight for a cause. They don't fight for a creed. They don't fight for a motto. It's like, hey, if you're coming between me and mine, you're going to get it. You know what I mean? And I think that there's a balance there that is a much more deeper philosophical and psychological debate that we don't have time to get into.
That's a big one.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it. But looking forward to episode 3. yeah, this is No Disintegrations, Ahsoka episode 2. We talked around it, but we hit the high points of the show, and we'll check you guys out next week. Thanks.
See you.